A tribe facing extinction gave birth to a charismatic holy man who had a vision that would halt westward expansion and end the white man's reign in their lands. The leader spread his gospel from California to South Dakota. He believed a certain ritual would unite all the native tribes, something the US government feared, and labeled the ghost dance movement a cult that must be destroyed. It would all come to a bloody head on December 29th, 1890. The 19th century saw the native people's populations decimated throughout the US. Half of their people had been lost over the century, going from 10% of the US population to just 0.31%. Those that remained faced threats of attack, poor living conditions, economic decline, and plummeting political power. Once magnificent, expansive tribes had been toppled and forced to assimilate to ways of life that were not their own, or suffer the brutal consequences. Hope was at an all-time low as the surviving native tribes saw the writing on the wall. In the Mason Valley of modern-day Nevada lived a band of the Northern Paiute tribe. This group, translated as the Cypress Bowl Beaters, survived in harsh desert regions located around large bodies of water to secure fish and wild game. Euro-Americans began their contact with the group in the 1840s, but the band remained generally unaffected by European influence. But as more settlers encroached into their lands, conflicts began to emerge. These tit-for-tat retaliations over property led to several battles spanning from 1860 to 1878. But nothing caused more casualties for the Northern Paiute than the spread of Eurasian infectious diseases such as smallpox. 1867, an epidemic of typhoid fever tore through the community, killing a tenth of the population. The death toll destabilized the tribe, crumbling their political structure and leaving survivors traumatized. And due to the lack of structure, the tribe began to turn to holy men for guidance and leadership. In 1869, just 2 years after the brutal typhoid fever outbreak, a Northern Paiute man sat atop a mountain. He has a vision of hope for his distraught people. The man, Wadziwab, descends the mountain to tell the tribe of what he has seen. Within a few moons, there will be a great upheaval or earthquake, during which the improvements of the whites, all their houses, their goods, stores, would remain, but the whites would be swallowed up, while the Indians would be saved and permitted to enjoy the earth and all the fullness thereof, including anything left by the wicked whites. This was a potent thought, and many in the tribe were desperate to believe their way of life could be restored and justice would be served. But others questioned how an earthquake would only affect the settlers, as earthquakes are quite indiscriminate. Wadziwab ascended the mountain a second time to seek clarity on the matter. His updated vision now said that all people would perish in the quake, but a few days later their people would return from the dead, while the intrusive settlers would remain perished. But as all doomsday prophecies go, the timeline for this supernatural event came and went. Tribespeople began to lose faith in Wadziwab's vision. He would ascend the mountaintop for his third and final vision. He professed that those who believed in the prophecy would be resurrected, but those that did not believe would stay in the ground and be damned forever with the whites. And there were certain actions that had to be undertaken to bring about this prophecy. Followers must participate in a round dance, and round dances had been common throughout several tribes. This slow-moving circular dance had various meaning over the years, but Wadziwab altered the purpose of the round dance to now include resurrecting their dead. As the months went on, the event never occurred, but prior to his death in 1872, Wadziwab claimed in 4 years' time, a train coming from the east would return with the tribe's dead, and peace would finally be restored. But 4 years later had passed, and the dead had yet to return on that train. Most lost faith and continued on with their lives, with Wadziwab's prophecy fading into obscurity. Though mostly forgotten, Wadziwab's vision lived on in the hearts of select followers who helped Wadziwab in spreading this new religious movement. One of the original followers assisting him was known as Tavibo, a weather doctor and shaman for the Northern Paiute. Tavibo had a young son, Wovoka, who grew up watching these dances and seeing the effect Wadziwab had on his tribe. And little did anyone know that the young boy would go on to be the new prophet, resurrecting the movement and uniting tribes from all over the western United States. It was common for Paiute members to be employed on ranches for seasonal work since the settlers had destroyed the land and therefore the food the natives had relied upon. So in his teenage years, Wovoka would go to work on a farm. The Northern Paiute would live together in a camp on the land and would maintain their cultural customs and daily way of life. But Christianity and European beliefs began to have influence. The ranch Wovoka worked on was owned by a white man named David Wilson. During this period, Wovoka adopted a new European name, Jack Wilson. Wovoka, or now known as Jack, would come into contact with settlers often and didn't carry the same hatred Wadziwab felt towards them, but he did long to restore his community to a more peaceful, abundant time. As he aged, Wovoka began to have visions, though he was too young and unskilled to interpret them. He went under the wing of a local shaman who would nurture Wovoka's spiritual abilities. He was practicing to become a weather doctor like his father. His notoriety increased, and he became a respected holy man and a community leader in his own right, preaching universal love while presiding over ceremonies and round dances. Just 20 years after Wadziwab delivered his first set of prophecies, Wovoka too would have a powerful vision during the solar eclipse. Wovoka, going by his new name of Jack Wilson, told followers he stood before God in heaven and had seen many of his ancestors engaged in their favorite pastimes, and that God showed Wilson a beautiful land filled with wild game and instructed him to return home to tell his people that they must love each other and not fight. Jack believed that Jesus would return to Earth a few years later if they continued to work honestly and to not lie, cheat, or steal. His views were far more moderate, believing they should respect the US government's rule and adhere to strict practices of nonviolence. If they lived a peaceful life, then they would be reunited with their ancestors in God's presence, in the other world where there would be no more pain. Jack Wilson had blended the beliefs of the first wave of prophecies from Wadziwab with the Christian influence he was exposed to on the ranch as a teen. But more than living a principled life, God had commanded them to engage in a round dance to help bring about this new world. This dance would later be known as the Ghost Dance. So what is this dance that can restore peace to the land? The dance would last for 5 days' time, and it would be repeated at certain intervals. Different songs would be sung as tribe members held hands and danced around in a circle with a shuffling side-to-side step, swaying to the rhythm of the songs. Songs with a faster rhythm were sung to help dancers wishing to achieve a trance or perhaps experience visions. Those experiencing a trance might leave the circle of dancers and dance on their own or go lie on the ground. Here is a recording of an actual ghost dance song recorded by anthropologist James Moody, the most prominent scholar of the ghost dance, who would be allowed to witness the ritual, though he would not be granted access to the more sacred versions. This powerful ritual soon began to spread to other tribes all throughout the western U.S. The dance crossed the Rockies to the Utes in Colorado, to the Mojave in Arizona, into Idaho with the Shoshone, to Wyoming with the Arapaho, and then into the Dakotas with the Sioux people. Jack Wilson became known throughout the land as a messiah and a prophet. Each tribe that adopted this new belief system put their own spin on both the ideology and the ghost dance itself. For instance, the Lakota Sioux had a more militaristic interpretation. Chief Kicking Bear of the Lakota began including ghost shirts, believed to repel bullets of the white man. The Lakota interpreted all evil is washed away as the removal of white men from their lands, though they did ultimately believe this could be achieved non-violently. As it spread from northern Paiute to Arapaho to Cheyenne to Sioux, the U.S. government became worried to see once unassociated, even warring tribes now uniting under a common belief. And modern-day people often view Native Americans as this monolith, but the reality was they spoke different languages and had distinct cultures. This new religious movement was spread in a very short amount of time, crossing cultural barriers in the blink of an eye, and the U.S. Army had taken notice. Frightened settlers and American media mistook the dances as aggressive and warlike, even though the movement was peaceful. Misinformation began to spread about the ghost dance as a cult of savage, bloodthirsty natives. Media stoked fears of a potential Indian uprising, a revolt that would surely lead to bloodshed. The Sioux believed Jack's teaching and adopted the new religion. The U.S. Army feared the Sioux chief Sitting Bull would utilize the movement to unite people in an attempt to overthrow the government. In February of 1890, the U.S. government broke the Lakota Treaty. Lakota once controlled a huge portion of South Dakota, and now they were forced onto 5 smaller reservations. The government was aiming to conform Indian to the white man's ways, peaceably if they will, or forcibly if they must. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was tasked with overseeing the transition. The buffalo had been nearly eradicated, and the U.S. government promptly cut their food rations in half. Facing starvation, the Lakota began their ghost dance in an act of desperation. The Bureau of Indian Affairs were frightened by what they saw. The Lakota chief, Kicking Bear, was forced off the reservation in an attempt to end the dance, but the tribe continued on without him. Government agent James McLaughlin believed it was not Kicking Bear, but Sitting Bull that truly controlled the spiritual movement, and he called in thousands of troops to the region. One agent wrote to the government, "We need protection and we need it now. Indians are dancing in the snow, wild and crazy. The leader should be arrested and confined at some military post until the event is quitted, and this should be done at once." On December 15, 1890, Sitting Bull was put under arrest for not putting an end to the ghost dance. During the commotion, one of Sitting Bull's men fired at an Army lieutenant, hitting him in the side. The Army lieutenant then turned to Sitting Bull and fired a shot, killing Sitting Bull. Some of the remaining Lakota chiefs and their tribe attempted to reconvene with others at the Pine Ridge Reservation to discuss the incident. They were intercepted by the U.S. Army on the banks of Wounded Knee Creek. The Army had them set up camp overnight so they could watch over them. The following day, December 29, 1890, the soldiers approached the tribe to confiscate their weapons and a standoff ensued. And we still don't know who fired first, but a shot was fired. An Army officer then gave the command to open fire on the Lakota Sioux. When it was over, 25 U.S. soldiers were dead, and 125 Lakota Sioux lay slain, most of whom were women and children. When news got back to the east of what had occurred, the broader American public were shocked, many sympathizing with the Sioux. And this led to legislation that fully reinstated the Lakota Sioux's rations and ensured they'd be paid more equitably for their taken lands. But the massacre at Wounded Knee had a chilling effect on the popularity of the ghost dance movement, as tribes feared government retribution for practicing the dance. Wovoka was devastated to hear of the horror at Wounded Knee, and he brought the movement underground, continuing to preach his nonviolent gospel. But over the years, as European society fully eclipsed the native tribes, the movement faded out, as Wovoka quietly lived out his life in Mason, Nevada. Wovoka passed away on September 20th, 1932, and you can visit his grave at the Paiute Cemetery in the town of Schurz, Nevada. The ghost dance still continues to this day at private ceremonies by those that wish to remember the massacre at Wounded Knee. Thanks for watching.